Okay, good morning everyone. Cole here from Aggressor Adventures. Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Zoom into Adventure. Today we will be talking about sharks. So it's Shark Week, and we have Samantha on the call again. How are you doing today, Sam?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. How's the weather there in Florida today?
Good. Clear. I have high hopes that we will not be disconnected.
Okay, good. Guys, you all are welcome to ask questions here in the chat box. Let me go ahead and send you a quick message here. Ask any questions you want. We'll get to them at the end of the call. So we've changed Samantha's bio for her last calls here to talk a little bit more about her shark background. And let me read that to you guys now. Samantha's Director of Conservation Outreach for Aggressor Adventures and the Sea of Change Foundation with a mission to create positive change for our natural world. Samantha's work includes developing Green the Fleet sustainability initiatives for Aggressor's operation. A Harvard graduate with 20 years diving experience, Whitcraft has taught on the subjects of environmental ethics and ecosystems. Her work with sharks includes serving as programs manager for Shark Savers and with Wild Aid, investigating the unsustainable shark fin market in Hong Kong and mainland China. I didn't know that, Sam. That's cool. An avid photographer and published nature writer, she is a Platinum Pro 5000 diver, recognized by the scuba diving industry as an elite water explorer. All right. I think we're ready to roll. Are you ready?
Of course. I always am ready to talk about sharks.
Yes, let's hear it.
Okay. So share screen.
Let's do it. Yep.
Okay. All right.
I see you.
Cool. Let's go. All right. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So I just wanted to add to a little bit about me and my experience with sharks to what Cole said, just to give you some perspective on why I absolutely adore sharks. So my first introduction to sharks up close and personal was over 20 years ago on a remote atoll called Curie in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And the long and the short of that story is that a very curious, very large tiger shark spent a lot of time investigating my kayak while I was in it. So that definitely got my attention. Then as I was working in Miami at the NOAA Fisheries Lab and during my master's, I had the opportunity to take a course at the Bimini Shark Lab with the late, great Dr. Gruber, who was the first person to throw me in the water with sharks in a way that was managed and where I felt safer than having a shark try to eat my kayak while I was in it. And now since then, I've worked in shark conservation off and on for my career. And also I've now dived with over 14 species of sharks, and I'm hoping to add a few more. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today is that in the context of Aggressor Adventures, basically every week is Shark Week. I'm super happy, and we're all super happy to celebrate, Shark Week as this one week where the whole world turns its attention to programming that focuses on sharks. But the truth is that with Aggressor Adventures and on all the yachts, really, it's always Shark Week because in well-managed areas and where divers are respectful and where reefs are healthy, there are almost always sharks, more or less sharks. So I want to expand on that. Oops. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today a little bit is Sharks 101. I'm going to geek out a little bit on natural history and anatomy, but I'm going to be sure to focus on things that I think divers will find interesting and not get too lost in the scientific weeds. And then I want to talk about what responsible shark diving is, because that's really important to know as a diver. And then talk specifically about Aggressor Adventures sharks, the when and where you can see sharks with Aggressor Adventures. And then, of course, I want to dedicate a little bit of time to shark conservation And we're going to go a little bit down a dark rabbit hole of some of the darker side of what's happening with sharks and rays. But then we're going to come right back out, and I'm going to give you some great ideas on what you can actually do so you feel empowered to help with shark conservation. Okay, so really quickly, this might be a review for some people, but it's worth remembering these key things about sharks. So sharks are fish. They're all fish, even whale sharks. The difference between sharks and the other fishes or bony fishes is that they're cartilaginous. That means their entire skeleton is made out of cartilage and connective tissue. So the difference between cartilage and bone is like if you touch your nose and feel that it's squishy, or you touch your ears and you feel that they're squishy, that's all cartilage. Whereas in your fingers, it feels really hard, and that's bones. So sharks are all cartilage. They're part of the family of elasmobranchs, which also includes rays, which is why sometimes we refer to rays as flat sharks. There are 500 more or less species of identified shark. There's a little bit of debate there. There always is, because of something called clumping or splitting, and it depends on how scientists want to define what a new species is or what an old species is, or so. But that's a good number to go by. It's important to note also that although we think of sharks as big, toothy, awesome animals, that within that 500 species of sharks, there's a huge array of diversity, which you can see a little bit of in this cladogram here. So they range in size and characteristics from the dwarf lantern shark, which is 8 inches long and could fit in your hand, to the largest fish in the ocean, which is the whale shark, which can reach up to 40 feet long. So that's a lot of size difference. And also, not all sharks are predators. So we think of them all as apex predators. Some are mesopredators, which means that they may be preyed on themselves. And some are filter feeders, like basking sharks, megamouth sharks, whale sharks. They're all they're all filter feeding sharks. And then amazingly, sharks have existed for 400 million years. They were around 50 years before what we would recognize as modern trees existed on the planet. And they've survived 4 global mass extinctions. So they are definitely a group of animals to be respected for a lot of reasons, but also for that reason. So a little bit about anatomy without getting too far into the weeds. So sharks have fins, obviously, usually 8. And what's important to know about the fins is that, one, even though they're cartilaginous, they're pretty rigid, and unlike bony fishes that have rays and then soft tissue in between, so they can kind of navigate their fins. Or manipulate their fins, I should say. Sharks can't really do that. So that's why sharks can't do things like back up. The other thing to know about the fins is that they do have these protein filaments in them that help keep them rigid. And those are the filaments that the shark fins are sought after, that are the ingredient that look like noodles in shark fin soup, as sad as that is. The nostrils of the shark are super interesting because they create a directional sense of smell. So the way to think of that is that the amount of time it takes for a scent in the water to get to a to a shark's left or right nostril can tell it, that time difference can tell it what direction that scent is coming from. It's sort of like the way we hear. The difference in time between when you hear something in your left ear and your right ear can often tell you what direction that sound is coming from. But we really can't do that with smell at all, I don't think. But what's really interesting about that for a diver is that you can observe sharks following a scent smell. And it's much more interesting to do so when you know that that's what they're doing, because you'll see them just turn right into a stream of current or scent that's been put in the water, and they're doing that directionally with that directional sense of smell. Shark eyes, it's important to note about shark vision. There's always been, the yum yum yellow theory that sharks are more interested in the color yellow. And the fact is that it's probably more that sharks see contrast of colors more clearly. And that's because many sharks whose vision has been studied are either equivalent to what we would call colorblind, or they see in a very grayish, greenish scale, probably. But despite that, they have very well adapted vision for seeing in the dark, in dark water, I should say. And the other thing that's really interesting is that the famous quote, I don't know if anybody's obsessed with the film Jaws as I am, but I am, and I can quote the entire film. The line where Quint says, you know, black eyes, a doll's eyes, rolls back in its head, right? So after that, you think of all shark's eyes as being these black, lifeless eyes. And in fact, as you can see in this picture here, many shark species do have distinct pupils that can contract and expand just like ours. So that's sort of a misnomer. And the more time you spend in the water with sharks, the more you look at their eyes, you find that there are many sharks that have really beautiful, interesting eyes. And the great thing about tiger sharks is that when they swim by you, if you look in their eyes, you can see them tracking. You can see their eye moving inside the socket, tracking and looking at you. So sharks' eyes are really interesting. And then I want to geek out a little bit on the ampullae of Lorenzini because they're just so amazing. Yes, they were named by a guy named Lorenzini, who was a scientist in the 1800s. And if you discover a new sensory structure in an animal, you get to name it after you also. They are thousands of electroreceptor organs in the face of the shark, or in this diagram, what's called the snout. And they're, we're going to talk a little bit more in the next slide about them. But basically, pretty much only sharks have them. A version of them has been found in some other species, I think like sawfish, but they're really associated mostly with sharks. And they're a very unique sensory organ. And when we talk about sharks being able to sense the movement and electrical signal of prey, it's those ampullae of Lorenzini that allow them to do that for the most part. And you can see in the picture here, you can, if you look closely around the eye and towards the front of the snout, you can see little speckles, and those are the ampullae of Lorenzini. And then I want to touch briefly on the liver because sharks, unlike fish, don't have a swim bladder, so they can't control their buoyancy the way a bony fish would. So instead, they have large oily livers that are full of squalene, which is an oil. And the reason I want to mention that is because we're going to talk about squalene and its unsustainable use in the cosmetic industry in the conservation slide at the end. But I also want to mention that, you know, that oily liver isn't really the perfect solution for buoyancy. As divers, we know that controlling how much air is in your BC is really a really good way to control buoyancy, or to add to your control of buoyancy. So the other things that sharks do is they, because they have cartilage and they don't have bones, they're lighter. That helps with buoyancy. And also they do something called dynamic lift. And again, those fins that are more structured allows them to basically, certainly at depth, almost fly. They get lift from those fins the way an airplane would taking off. And there's some great footage on the internet of white sharks at Guadalupe Island that were filmed with ROVs at depth doing that, like basically flying. It's really amazing to see it. Okay, so this is my one super geeky slide where I want to talk a little bit about ampullae of Lorenzini because they're so amazing. So they're jelly-filled pores, right? And there's thousands of them on the heads of most sharks. And this is a great picture to see them because where that arrow is pointing, you can see all those hundreds and hundreds of little dots, and those are all jelly-filled electrosensors. So what's amazing about them is not only can the shark use them to sense prey, but there's early research that's developing that suggests that they can also sense the electromagnetic fields that are created by ocean currents, and even the electromagnetic fields of the planet itself, which they may use for migration, which is fascinating because recent studies have suggested that birds also have that electromagnetic sense, and that's part of the way that they do long distance navigations. So, and this diagram at the bottom shows you that all of the ampullae of Lorenzini are actually connected with these channels, and that also helps them function as an entire sensory system. Okay, so now that we've gone over why sharks are so incredibly amazing, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, there are so many other reasons that they're incredible. We could talk about behaviors, we could talk about hunting, we could talk about reproduction and sex, and I mean, their habitat and ecological value, but we'll save that for another time. But those are all reasons also why sharks are completely amazing. So now that we know that sharks are amazing, and we want to dive with them and see them and learn more about them by being in the water with them, what we need to understand is what is responsible shark diving. So there's a few overall guidelines that are worth sharing now, and I'm proud to say that Aggressor Adventures follows all of these. So when you go shark diving with Aggressor Adventures, as long as you do your part as well and you follow these guidelines also, you can feel confident that sharks are being respected, enjoyed and respected. So one of the key parameters for responsible shark diving is that sharks are viewed in a marine protected area. So that can be anything from a national park to a community reserve to a specific shark sanctuary, or a limited no fishing area where sharks are protected de facto because of the limited or no fishing. And that where that shark diving is done, the dive guides and the divers and the operators all follow the local rules and regulations. And many places now do have good regulations about how to dive with sharks sustainably, local regulations. So the other one, and this is highly controversial, and I'm open to discussing it, and with everything, there's always an exception to the rule. But generally speaking, sharks are not fed. So that means that we don't want to alter their behavior by supplementing how they would feed naturally by hunting. However, scenting the water, which means you have bait or chum or a slurry inside of a metal container that the sharks can't get into, that seeps out the scent of the dead fish or bait into the water. Because of what we said about how sharks smell. They smell very well and very directionally. Once you put that scent into the water, they will find it and come upstream to it. And then they'll hang around for a while trying to figure out where the food is that's associated with that scent. So if that's done in moderation and the way that it's put out keeps the sharks from getting any significant amount of food, that can be sustainable. Another key point is that divers are fully informed about the shark's behaviors, whatever species it is that they're going to be getting in the water with, usually by the local dive guides, sometimes by a park ranger, that they are fully aware of what the safety protocols are so that they feel safe and they know what their behavior should be in the water in relation to the sharks. And they're given clear guidance about not touching, petting, or chasing sharks. That's for the sharks' protection as well as the divers' protection. You don't pet a shark just as much as when you go to Yellowstone, you wouldn't pet a grizzly. It's pretty much the same thing. It's also a matter of respect. So then dive guides often need to, as part of responsible shark diving, share their expertise about those sharks and help educate about both the local and the global plight or status of those specific sharks. So if the divers are diving somewhere where those sharks are fully protected and the populations are doing great, definitely share that information. But also share that for most species, there's usually someplace else, well, for most threatened or endangered species, there's usually someplace else where they're not doing well. So for example, you might be diving with schooling hammerheads in a place where you see a huge school, and so that would lead you to believe, oh, there's tons of schooling hammerheads. Well, the fact is that 90% of coastal hammerhead populations have been severely depleted in the last, I think it's the last 20 years. So that would be important to know to put that experience in context. And then the final thing is that divers who have now had this experience with sharks and have come to had the privilege of shark diving should support shark conservation when they get home, either with a local organization in their hometown or revert back to the country that they were in where they saw the sharks and give back. You got something from the sharks by enjoying them, so give back so that the sharks can be protected. So here's the exciting part. So there are at least 16 shark species that you can see with aggressor liveaboards. And they are in no particular order, although the big boys are at the top. Great white, tiger, and bull sharks. I have dived with tigers and bulls, and I highly recommend both. Great whites are on my bucket list. Gray, black tip, and white tip reef sharks. If you haven't dived with white tip reef sharks, that's a good starter shark because they're adorable. Whale sharks are amazing. Even though they're huge, they're a good starter shark if you haven't dived with sharks yet, because the magnitude of them is beautiful and overwhelming. They're gorgeous to look at, and they're filter feeders, so there isn't much to worry about there. Galapagos silky and silver tip sharks. I've dived with all three, and all three are beautiful. Scalloped hammerhead sharks, schooling, and we'll talk a little bit in the next slide about where you can see some of these. And then Caribbean reef lemon and nurse shark, some favorites. And then leopard and coral cat sharks, which are a little bit smaller and more colorfully patterned sharks. Okay, so here's a brief kind of overview of shark seasons, key shark seasons with aggressor liveaboards. So great white sharks are seen at Guadalupe, Mexico, and that's August through October with the Socorro aggressor. Whale sharks are seen at Cocos Island, Costa Rica, and Galapagos with the Okeanos and Galapagos aggressors. And those are May through August. And then in Indonesia with the Raja Ampat and Indo aggressor, it's April through May for whale sharks. And then for hammerhead sharks, this is specifically what everybody wants to see, the big schooling aggregations of hammerhead sharks. At Cocos Islands with Okeanos aggressor, that's June through September. It's in Galapagos, June through November, and in the Red Sea, May through July. So that's a lot to remember. And there's also all these other beautiful shark species to see that we talked about, black tip reef shark. And let's not underestimate the nurse shark. They're beautiful. They don't get the love and respect they deserve. Down at the bottom there, you can see the little white tip sharks, which at Rocca Partito in Socorro, they actually pile up in these holes in the rock on top of each other, and it's adorable. So you don't have to take notes or remember everything I just said about, what to see when and where. If you go to aggressor.com, actually has a whole page on sharks that tells what shark species you can hope to see in different locations and the different seasons that were listed on the previous slide. So you can always, if you want to start knocking off your shark species that you dive with, that's a great resource is to go to that webpage. Okay, so this is the darker side of things. It's just one slide. It's not good news, but we do have to talk about it briefly. So just to give you a sense of how important this is to me and how personally I take it, that is a photo of me in the dried seafood markets in Guangzhou, China in 2014 when I was doing research. They didn't know I was. We were telling them we were seafood buyers from Australia on what the trajectory was on demand for shark fins at the largest dried seafood market in China. We also did some of that in Hong Kong as well during the same trip. And this is just one photo. I have thousands of one of the warehouses that we managed to get into. This was the size of like maybe a 4-car garage. And it was these very, very small fins here. And I don't have an expertise in identifying dried fins, but because they were uniformly all small, I would tend to think that they're all from either small sharks or juvenile sharks. And that garage of that size, you see those large bags behind me, was absolutely full of bags containing those same fins. And an interesting story about that, another reason that I think that they are probably from juvenile sharks is that about a year after this trip, I was doing research in the Line Islands, and we stopped at Palmyra, which is called the sharkiest place in the world. And we stopped there for 3 days, and I took a walk around the island in the shallows and had little baby blacktip reef sharks about this big, literally probably 20 of them swim around my ankles and follow me for the whole walk around the island, because there were so many juvenile blacktip reef sharks in the shallows there. It was a nursery area. And then 5 days later, we were at Christmas Atoll, which is is the atoll with the largest lagoon in the world. So in theory, it should have a huge nursery area for blacktip reef sharks. And when I asked the local dive operator there about that, I wanted to go and see the baby blacktips again. She told me that no, just a year ago, a fleet of longliners had come in, and some of the crew had gotten off and gone into the nursery, and with nets, large seine nets, had basically removed all of the small blacktip reef sharks because the fins are worth so much. So based on that experience, I don't see why that's not what that could be. I hope it's not. So there are millions of sharks per year that are still killed for the fin trade. There is evidence, some of it collected in 2014 and published by WildAid, based on some of the work that I did with Paul Hilton and others, that the demand for shark fin in China at that point was declining, which was good news. The bad news was that a follow-up report showed that the demand for manta ray gill rakers was increasing. And it's very likely that it's the same traders just switching from one product to another. So despite that decline, the global trade in shark and ray meat and other products is on the rise. So an example is the gills that I talked about, and those are collected in theory for a tonic for traditional Chinese medicine. However, if you look in the book that's hundreds of years old, that's the guide for traditional Chinese medicine, gill rakers of manta rays are not in there. So there's reason to believe that this market was created. And then also another product that's taken from sharks is squalene, which is, remember I talked about the oil in their fatty livers, and that's mostly collected for the cosmetics industry. So because of all of this, the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which publishes and maintains the International Red List of Threatened and Endangered Species, which is the most comprehensive, scientifically based guide of where any individual species stands in terms of its current conservation status, population status. So the IUCN shark scientists estimate that 1/4, and this is all based on rigorous data and multiple studies, that 1/4 of all shark and ray species are currently threatened with extinction. And it's important to note that generally sharks aren't suitable for commercial fisheries because of their slower reproductive rate. So bony fishes generally reproduce by spawning. So they produce huge amounts of eggs, and those eggs produce huge amounts of larvae, and then some percentage of that become fish and then become part of the population that can later be fished. It's very simplified, but that's the idea. Most sharks have a much lower reproductive rate and produce as few as, some sharks and skates and rays lay eggs, most don't. Most have live birth, and they produce only a few pups at a time, depending on the species, anywhere between 3 to 100 or 200. And 100 or 200 may sound like a lot, but it's not a lot compared to a spawning bony fish that will spawn tens of thousands of eggs. So back to the good news. The good news is that there are things that you can do for shark conservation. So the even better news is that one of them is to go shark diving. There have actually been economic studies that reveal that making sharks worth more alive to divers than dead to the fin trade is a positive conservation strategy. So it makes sense, right? And there are examples, like for instance, in the Bahamas, there was a study done, I believe, by the Nature Conservancy that estimated that each shark that people dove with was worth up to $2 million a year in ecotourism income based on people coming to dive with those sharks, the flights, the hotels, the food, the rental equipment, everything that they pay for while they're in the Bahamas in order to enjoy these sharks. And there was a lot else that went into getting the Bahamas to be a shark sanctuary. But one of the factors that helped convince the Bahamian government, as I understand it and believe it, was that study. If you know that your sharks are worth that much more, let's say a shark is worth, rounded out, each fin is worth $100 in the fin trade, and each shark has 8 fins, that shark is worth $800 once. If that shark is kept alive and it's worth $2 million a year, that's a no-brainer. If sharks are managed correctly for ecotourism, they're worth much more to the local economy alive for shark diving than they are being caught and killed. So go shark diving, support the local economy, save a shark. Then the other thing that you can do that's really important is to choose sustainable seafood to avoid shark bycatch. So the best way to do that is you can download an app called Seafood Watch, and they have one for the west coast of the United States and one for the east coast of the United States. They may be developing ones or have ones for other parts of the world, or there may be other organizations that have one for other parts of the world. It's worth looking into if you're not in the US. But Seafood Watch, as you can see in this diagram here, lists seafood by whether it's a good choice, a best choice, or to avoid it. And they place in avoid those species that have a significant bycatch of sharks. So if you choose seafood that's a best choice or a good alternative, you're very likely not incurring shark bycatch when you choose to eat a fish. So that's a bonus, and it takes just a second to look it up on your phone. And then the next is, we talked about the squalene issue. So you can choose cosmetic products, and that includes not just makeup, but like moisturizer and, all kinds of things that you would put on your body and buy that are without shark-derived squalene. So one of the ways you can do that is there's a new certification that Shark Allies has put together called Shark Free. And for instance, the Coral Safe sunscreen that Aggressor uses, that escapes my mind right now, has just been certified, Stream to Sea has just been certified as shark free, so it has no squalene in it. If you can't find right away the shark-free label on something that you want to buy, the other label you can look for is the Leaping Bunny. The Leaping Bunny certifies that no animal products have been used. So obviously, if no animal products have been used, then no shark products have been used. And then the last thing that you can do is you can follow and support shark conservation organizations like Shark Allies, that has created the shark-free certification and is also spearheading the shark fin trade ban in Florida, which is currently sitting, I believe, on Ron DeSantis's desk waiting his signature, which we expect that he will sign. And then, shameless plug, the Sea of Change Foundation did fund the first ever shark and ray census in the northeast part of Costa Rica in the Pacific. And I'll be talking a little bit about that, along with a bunch of other projects that the Sea of Change Foundation has done, on August 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 2 p.m. GMT. So if you want to hear more about sharks and more about conservation, tune into that. So that's all I have for today, but I would love to continue to talk about sharks if anybody has any questions.
All right. Great job, Sam. Let's go ahead and turn your share screen off, and I'll read you some here.
Okay.
So you said you have dove with 13 different variety of sharks. Is that right? Is that
Yes.
13? Of those 13, what was your favorite? And give us a quick story about it. You have to pick one.
That's horrible. Who would ask me that?
Me. I came up with that.
Oh, uh, okay. Well, I'm just gonna have to go with the first because you never forget your first.
Okay.
So that goes back to the Curie story. So you have to understand what happened to me with a tiger shark the first time I saw a tiger shark one-on-one to understand why the first time I dove with a tiger shark, it was so amazing. So super quick version of the story. I was living alone on a very remote atoll in the middle of the Pacific. And one of my jobs was to take a kayak out and go the circumference of the island and survey monk seals, moms and pups. And normally the tiger sharks don't come into the lagoon until the albatross start to fledge, because the albatross chicks land in the lagoon and the tiger sharks come and eat them like popcorn off the surface of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the albatross chicks hadn't really started to fledge yet, so I wasn't too worried about it. And I had seen some reef sharks and some Galapagos sharks in the lagoon, but I hadn't seen any tiger sharks close to shore, so really wasn't worried about it. So I was kayaking around and saw a very large shadow off to my left, and thought it was a monk seal because they get really big, and turned and looked and realized it was a very large tiger shark about the same size as my kayak, paralleling me. And inner voice said, "Don't panic. It's fine. You're pretty close to shore. Just turn around, go into shore." So I took a big swoop of my paddle, turned my kayak in one turn, and made the mistake of looking behind me as I did it. And as I'm turning, the shark is, and this gets back to like the Ampullae of Lorenzini, right? And the lateral line, because it just literally, and then I was like, okay. So then I remembered, okay, don't splash, that's also going to attract attention. Just quietly paddle into shore. So I started taking big, long strokes. And I'm like, don't look back, don't look back, don't look back, don't look back. And then I looked back. And this is what stuck in my mind until the first time I dove with a tiger shark. As I look back, the shark is halving the distance between the stern of my kayak. Like, it's closing in twice as fast as I'm going. And it was going so fast that the leading edge of so the dorsal fin was out of the water, just like in the movie Jaws. Okay. And so from the leading edge of the dorsal fin, there was a wake. That's how fast the shark was moving towards the stern of my kayak.
Wow.
So at that point, I was like, terrified. So I looked down and I realized I was in like 3 feet of water. So the last thing you want to do is jump in the water. But the other thing I didn't want to do was take longer to get to shore. So I literally like threw myself into the water, like into the water, and then jumped up, and I was up to like my thighs in water, ran forward, realizing that this was now going to make the shark that was already interested probably come even closer. And for some reason I don't understand to this day, I grabbed the leash at the bow of the kayak, ran through the water, and dragged the kayak behind me and ran up onto the beach. And as soon as I was on dry land, it's at that, like that game when you're a kid, hot lava. Like as soon as I got onto the stand, I pivoted, turned, and just like slammed down onto the sand and let go of the kayak leash. And at that point, the shark rammed into the stern of the kayak with its rod-strum, and then opened its mouth. When sharks open, you saw this at Tiger Beach, they open their mouth and they extrude their teeth. Okay. I didn't know they could do that. I'd never seen that. Tiger shark opens its mouth, extrudes its jaw and teeth, wraps it around the stern, pointy part of the kayak, and shakes. Then realizes it's not yummy and tries to get off the kayak and can't, because it's now in such shallow water that its belly is on the sand.
Oh, no.
So then ensues literally an explosion of sand, shark, and kayak. Shark finally backs off, gets away, and then gets into shallow enough water, turns, and heads down the beach. And I realize it's heading towards the monk seal mom and pup that I was just on my way to do a check on. And I was like, no, not today. Mm-mm. So I literally like sprinted down the beach, got over all of my fear, semi-illegally shooed the seals further up the beach, and then ran into the water at the tiger shark and was like, get away from my seals. So given that was my first experience with tiger sharks, it took me a long time to think that it would be a good idea to get in the water with a tiger shark. So the first time I went to Tiger Beach, it was to write an article for, I can't remember which magazine. And luckily, one of the dive masters was a good friend of mine. And I confided in him, and I was working for Shark Savers at the time. So it was hard for me to admit, I'm scared. Like, I'm fine getting in the water with the lemon sharks and the nurse sharks and all that, but when the tiger sharks come in, I'm going to be really, really scared. And he's like, no, you're not. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be fine. So he finally got me in the water with the tiger shark. And sure enough, that's a whole other story. But the culmination of it all is that once she, and it was Emma, once she glided past me and her eye looked at me and I looked at her eye, and, you know, I could see there was someone there, and she could see that, you have that moment with an animal where like there's a moment of recognition, and she went by. It was like the fear was instantly replaced with awe and respect. And so that would be my finest moment, because it's the story that I always tell people who are afraid to get in the water with sharks, because being in the water with the sharks is the most important key to learning to replace fear with respect.
That's a good point. Now, when you tell this story to these people that are afraid of sharks, does it help their fear?
I think
more scared when they're chasing.
Well, I don't always tell it. So, for instance, I went to the Galapagos with Celine Cousteau on a project to throw a bunch of Australian surfers in the water with sharks there. And these were not Australian surfers who necessarily wanted to get in the water with sharks. So they were so nervous that I did not tell them that story, but I did literally push them into the water with sharks. But they had the same reaction. They were busy telling me about how their uncle or their aunt or somebody had been killed by a white, like all Australians have a story. And I was like, I hear you. We're still getting in the water with these 100 Galapagos sharks that are swimming crystal clear water under the boat, and we're doing it now. So let's go. So I'm pretty when I am dealing with people who have an innate fear, I'm careful about telling that story, because there's other stories I can tell too.
Yeah, Natalie here at the office chimed in that she is now more scared.
Natalie, you have to come shark diving with me. We'll start you with something easy like whale sharks, and you'll get over your fear.
Starting with whale sharks sounds like the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Find you some nurse sharks somewhere. That seems definitely more easy.
Well, it's interesting. Did you know that in the International Shark Attack file, that the shark species that has the most entries for biting humans is nurse sharks?
I didn't know that, but isn't it like a hickey when they bite you? It's nothing to worry about.
No, if they really bite you, you're going to hate it. But the reason is because people think that nurse sharks are harmless, that they're docile or whatever. No animal is docile if you manhandle it. So people who don't know any better go and they'll grab a nurse shark by the tail or try and pet it, and the nurse shark is going to go no, and it's going to say no with the only tool it has, which is its mouth. So that's why the most bites are by nurse sharks. So don't
Because
don't
people
grab
aren't,
sharks.
yeah, because people aren't afraid of them. Yeah.
Right.
All right, quick answer on this. 3 sharks that you have not seen that are on your bucket list.
That's so easy. Great white.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen before I turn 55. That's just that has to happen. If I have to swim to Guadalupe, that's happening. Then I have seen hammerheads. I have never seen schooling hammerheads. I would like the picture behind me. That's as close as I've gotten. So I would like to have that moment of, oh, there's so many. And then
2 for 2. I'm right there with you. This list so far.
those are so high up there that
Have you seen a whale shark?
I told you that story. The first time I saw whale sharks, I saw 400 at once.
Oh, okay, that's right. Yeah, okay. Whale sharks on my list.
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, probably one of the little exotic sharks. I've never seen like an epaulet shark or a cat shark or leopard shark.
I want to
One
see
of those.
the Resher. I love that. Resher.
That that's really good. Also, oh no, before thresher, I would like to see an oceanic whitetip.
In Red Sea. Wobbegongs are cool too with all that little stuff
Yeah,
out here.
yeah.
All of them. How about that? That's the easy answer. All the above.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I put up that list of all the places with Aggressor Adventures that you could see sharks.
That's great.
Because, I mean, that literally, that's a bucket list right there. Like, just dive with all the sharks. Done.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have today. Sam, your next call is on the Sea of Change Foundation on August 27th, 10 a.m. Eastern, and which is 2 p.m. GMT. And yeah, so we appreciate you guys coming by. Good job today, Sam, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye. Happy Shark Week.
Happy Shark Week. Oh, we didn't talk about the shirt.
Oh, okay. So
last one.
the one more quick thing. My favorite Aggressor Adventures shirt is the one that I'm wearing, and on the front it's all business, Aggressor Adventures, and on the back it's all Shark Party. Let me see if you can see it. Can you see that?
Yeah, stand up a little bit. And now say something.
Okay, so it says, with Aggressor Adventures, every week is Shark Week. And so it's perfect for Shark Week, but it's also perfect for any time just to show that, you love sharks 365, which I do. And that shirt right now for Shark Week, it has a 20% off sale on the Aggressor online store, but you have to use the code Shark Week, and that's through Sunday. Is that right?
It should be through Sunday. Yep.
Yeah. So get you some.
Yeah. Good little plug there at the end. All right, guys. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time for Zoom into Adventure. Everyone have a great weekend. Take care.
Take care.